So, today I want to talk about the 4-day work week and the propaganda articles that are telling us it's a bad idea. I don't think enough people consider the origins of the 40-hour work week with 8 hours in a day and 5 days in a week. For many, I feel like it's considered normal, the status quo, and just generally how things are supposed to be. And for many others, it's a lost dream, as many people are working upwards of 60 to 80 hours a week just trying to make ends meet. However, it can never be said enough that the concept of a 40-hour work week was hard fought for by leftists who challenged the status quo of the wealthy and business class. It was not unusual historically for people to have to work 12 to 14-hour shifts with 6 to 7-day work weeks without any overtime or benefits. And after this 40-hour work week was secured at this one time in history, it was enough for a single person to pay for their entire family in the United States. And at the moment, we're nowhere near that. Besides increasing wages, which is something that we should definitely continue to fight for, one other desire that we should fight for while we're in our current economic system is to lower the amount of days that are worked and the amount of hours that are worked in the day as long as we get the same amount of pay. Especially with as much can be produced given increased mechanization and automation, there's no reason leftists shouldn't continue to fight for things like a 4-day work week and a 4-hour workday to improve people's conditions. Again, this must be contingent on the fact that we continue to get the same amount of pay and that workers are not strictly replaced through automation and mechanization. In fact, the idea of a 4-day work week is one that's actually been gaining traction as of late in a lot of different places. Iceland did a study that showed that even at 8 hours a day, the 4-day work week drastically improved people's conditions, and that is something that we should seriously consider. In fact, it was noted that workers reported feeling less stressed and less at the risk of burnout, and said that their health and work-life balance had improved. They also reported having more time to spend with their families, do hobbies, and complete household chores. And while a lot of businesses have been putting this under the idea that, oh, workers are more productive when they have more time off, I think we should really ignore that point. Maybe stress it to the business owners when we try to negotiate and try to get these concessions from the business class. But for ourselves, I think we should really consider the idea that being at less risk for burnout and having better health conditions and being able to spend more time with family and do things for ourselves is definitely a benefit that we need and should be fighting for. And the 4-day work week has actually been followed up on in other countries as well who have taken on their own trials. New Zealand, Japan, Ireland, and Spain have done this, and others are likely to join in the future, and I believe the most recent addition to that has been Scotland. That said, there are naturally propaganda pieces speaking out against this concept, because it's a desire to control people's lives. And if you don't have people coming in 5 days a week following the same status quo, how can you continue to keep that same normal facade that this is normal and the way things are supposed to be? And especially in the United States, which has an obsession with work, it's unsurprising that these type of propaganda pieces are popping up. So today I want to look at a few of those articles and call them out for their misrepresentation of what a 32-hour work week might look like, and possibly even less hours if we're being honest. We have here first this one article from the Wall Street Journal's opinion section. A 4-day work week is no holiday. For most parents with young children, shorter, not fewer work days is a better deal. So here we go with the general, think of the children won't benefit from this. And this is a bunch of nonsense, really. Now, if you want to make the argument that we should have shorter, not fewer work days, maybe that's something to consider. Maybe this article should be talking about how to get a 6-hour day or a 4-hour day and maybe maintain the 5-day work week. But that's not what's being advocated for. This is strictly trying to criticize the 4-day work week with no turnaround in the direction of decreasing work hours in a single day. We get here that is a 4-day work week the future of work, a headline in this newspaper recently asked. Let's hope not. Despite the hype, 4-day work weeks have a drawback if they mean longer work days. Well, the thing is, nobody's been talking about that. All of the studies that have been done, whether it be Iceland or any of the other countries, have been doing it so that it's an 8-hour day, 4 days a week, meaning it's a 32-hour work week. None of this is talking about an increase in amount of hours for a single day. In fact, what's happening actually is a lot of places in the United States have been proposing something like that for flex weeks where workers can choose their own hours. And that's not what we're talking about generally when we're talking about these experiments that are talking about a 4-day work week. We're talking about, at the very least, a 4-day work week with 8 hours a day. The article continues, companies may say that working hours won't increase, but reality can be different from what is outlined in a corporate handbook. This is a particular problem for families with young children. So here's the thing I need to point out right now. This is now blaming the workers' desire to have a 4-day work week for the companies not being willing and able to shift their own dogma against the stereotype of the status quo. So the companies are now doing something wrong, and workers who want a 4-day work week are being told this will be a drawback for you. No, it's just going to be an additional thing that has to be fought against, and that's why unions are so wonderful, and that's why starting in the direction of worker co-ops is going to be more wonderful in time, and that's why a lot of leftist projects have always fought for these increases and benefits over time and fought really hard for these concessions from the business class. Because no, the companies are not just going to give it. But if it's mandated in any way, shape, or form and it becomes the norm by the government, then the companies are going to have to fight hard against it. Now, in a place like the United States, that's going to be very hard to fight against. And yeah, nobody's arguing against that. But the point of the matter is that it's an issue with the companies expecting too much from people, as we will see in the next paragraph. For many parents, cramming 5 days of work into 4 will mean less time with their children. Why do they need to cram 5 days of work into 4? That's not what we're arguing for, and that's not what any of these particular ideas are representing. The 3-day weekends can be great for bonding, but children need a consistent daily presence. Not occasional chunks of time. Shorter days, not fewer days, are preferable. Well, then why don't you advocate for a shorter day? Why are you sticking with the idea that it's going to be a 40-hour work week? And that's the lack of imagination that I see in a lot of these articles, where they're still trying to maintain that people are going to have to work 40 hours a week. They don't. And they really need to get that through their heads when they're trying to write a lot of these articles. Maybe we could do 6 hours a day. If that had been the article, and the argument of this article, I wouldn't have even put it here. In fact, I'd be praising it of, well, maybe we shouldn't do a 4-day week. Maybe we should continue with 5 days a week, but only 6 hours a day. Then you would have had an argument, right? But that's not what's going on here. What it really is about maintaining the status quo of the 40-hour work week. And the rest of the article more or less continues to do this. Think of the children, and children need quality time, but they don't actually represent the amount of time that is increased, and the fact that the Iceland study actually showed that more time was able to be spent with children. Now, when we move on to this next article, Career Coaching, a 4-day work week, don't hold your breath, and it's talking about the 4-day work week in the United States. And it naturally gives a very short list of the pros about potentially being beneficial for your mental health and the quality of your work, but then completely eradicates that in the cons section, basically stating that none of that will actually transpire. But the truth is, a 4-day work week gives you less time to get your work done. Again, that same argument. That's the harsh reality. If you're only working 4 days a week, the pressure is on to jam-pack all you can into those 4 days. Why? If the employer's paying you the same amount, why would anybody work more, and why would anybody work harder than they've already been working? The expectation is that that extra 8 hours would have to go to someone else. That wouldn't be on you. And that seems like an issue of employers and not employees. If you're pressed to cram as much work and as many meetings as possible into only 4 days' time, your stress levels could be higher than when you were working a 5-day week. Yeah, if that was actually happening, but this is not the argument again. And this is the same thing that they're going to consistently argue for. And then we have this gem right here. Let's take a moment to think about the customers too. 5-day work weeks are the norm for most people, so it makes sense that people you serve would expect it from you and your business. Well, nobody's arguing not to do that. As a matter of fact, if you're arguing for that, then perhaps what you should be saying instead is a 4-day work week would mean that you'd have to hire more employees to keep your business open longer if you're that invested in it. That would be the argument to employers. That's not an issue for employees. This is not making any sense in terms of what the real argument is, and is again strawmanning it in a way that is trying to make it look ridiculous when it obviously is not. Because there's no reason the business has to be closed for more time than that. Will a 4-day work week happen in America? Don't hold your breath. Traditional work situations may have morphed some since the pandemic, but it would take a lot to convince most businesses to go for this change. That's funny because they're probably right about that, given that most businesses are refusing to increase their pay and are calling everything a worker shortage when they're having a pay shortage. A lot of companies are going to end up falling to the wayside because of this type of mentality. And it's quite obvious that it's just really missing the mark on how things are supposed to be going if we do go in the direction of a 32-hour work week, or heck, even less. And the 3-day weekend definitely would be better for more people, but again, they're constantly criticizing that. And this article should know better because it actually talks about the Iceland study, but it clearly didn't look into it. And this article here is one from The Conversation that really, really misses the mark, and this is talking about the UK. Why the 4-day work week is not the solution to modern work stress. So, surprise, surprise, it's going to try to argue that the 40-hour week is normal. In the UK, at least, the traditional view is that a full-time working week is approximately 40 hours and it's the way to maximize people's productivity. As if things don't change. As if ideas that weren't developed in the 1800s haven't been improved upon or don't change in time. As if we haven't developed more understandings of this. And the article goes into a whole thing with Robert Owen, which I just do not want to go into. Robert Owen is a very complex figure. Some consider him to be very much a proto-socialist. Others try to claim him as the greatest business owner of all time by quote-unquote creating the idea of the 40-hour work week. But the point is, whatever you think of him, there's a complex history behind him, and it's not useful to talk about somebody from 1817 to talk about whether or not we should be using that marker to measure productivity and what a worker should be working. We have here, as the article continues, Britain's long hours culture. The average working week in the UK is now 42.5 hours, and the nation is also the unpaid overtime capital of Europe. Okay, so that's a problem with the way businesses are operating. That means that there's a issue going on with the business class. That's not an issue that involves employees. If the amount of hours are lowered, then people should be paid more overtime. And just because it averages about 6.3 hours of free labor per week doesn't mean that that's an issue that employees shouldn't be getting less hours. That's a sign that employers need to figure out their stuff. And of course, the article has to say, well, now think about the employers and how they'll even manage it financially. Meanwhile, you've got most companies making record-breaking profits. This implies that employers are unlikely to be able to afford to reduce employees' workload. Why? Why wouldn't they be able to do that? There's no reason with a lot of these companies making record-breaking profits during the pandemic that they wouldn't be able to manage this. Many employers signing up for a 4-day work week would probably therefore expect workers to undertake the same amount of work within 4 days that was undertaken previously in 5. Again, no. And the reason for that is because if they actually had to pay overtime and that was actually mandated and done properly, and these companies were not committing wage theft, which is exactly what you're describing, then they would have to hire more employees. And they would do that because they would be incentivized after 32 hours of work to do so they don't have to pay time and a half. That's how that would work. And again, that means that you have to figure out systems to make sure that companies are not committing wage theft, not putting the blame and the onus on the workers and trying to say, well, that's just how companies will function, the end. No, employees will have to hard fight for this, and you're going to need restrictions in place to make sure this happens. That's what's truly being fought for. Now, assuming that the average person is currently spending all of their working hours actively working, doing the same job in 4 days would mean working over 12 hours a day, which is far more than the 8-hour day. Of course, this is the same argument, and you're going to see this all the time as we move forward. Well, they're going to eventually have to do 40 hours a week anyway. It's going to be 12 hours a day, 4 days a week. They're going to need 36 to 48 hours every week anyway. So why cram that into 4 days? That's not how things will work if it's actually enforced properly and if labor actually makes the strides that it needs to. People who work excessively long days also have lower levels of overall well being. But again, that's not what was being tested in the Iceland study. And if you're seeing a lot of this repeat on itself, that's because it's the same tired argument. And the thing is, a lot of people already do work 12-hour shifts, as they point out, and many more can't cram more hours into a day, like delivery drivers and self employed workers, or those who don't have the luxury of having 3 days off each, like care workers and gig economy workers. And again, you're pointing out an issue of the capitalism and of the capitalist class, not of the situation of workers trying to fight for these things. Just because one worker gets a benefit doesn't mean that everyone else shouldn't continue to fight to improve their conditions, and we shouldn't come together as working class people to try to make those ends meet. That is exactly the goal in all of this. But they're ignoring that, and they're blaming the problems of capitalism on the people who would not be able to benefit necessarily from these gains right away. But these are the same people that would have to continue to fight to change their conditions in that regard. But more generally, a 4 day week is likely to actually exacerbate inequality, says this article, and create resentment against those who have 3 day weekends. So you're saying that they're going to be infighting amongst the working class, and you're worried about the fact that that's going to happen? No, the real issue is that they're worried that by pointing out these issues of capitalism and talking about the fact that we don't need to have people working 40 hours a week, that some people who are working more might actually call into question why they have to work more hours, and they might turn their attention instead of at their fellow worker towards the companies. That's what they're afraid of, and that's why they're making this argument. Workers need to be working fewer hours, and particularly fewer intense hours. Oh, agreed. So you're going to bring up how we should have a 4-hour workday, right? No. Governments need to focus on ensuring that employers have increased control over the hours they work. Because we wouldn't want to argue that people should have less hours in a work day or maybe less hours in a work week. You're still trying to drive at that 40-hour mark. You're trying to keep the status quo and maintain everything. You wouldn't want to deal with loss of that. You wouldn't want to see more people hired and the loss of people being unemployed, because that might remove some of the incentives that capitalism uses to make sure that people stay quite content in their status quo position and that they don't fight too hard because, they could always end up unemployed. Yeah, that's what they're really worried about here. And so when they're saying this, they also are arguing that the 4 day work week will just need to make it affordable for more employees to manage on less. So if you want a 4 day work week, you'll just have to accept less pay. No, that's not what we're talking about. And of course, they want to flip the script and make it so that the universal basic income, which they're advocating for here, will pay the difference instead of having companies do it. No, I'm not saying I'm against a universal basic income, but it should not in any way be a tool that specifically pays for and upholds the capital class. It should be specifically designed and work towards making it more easy for people to live and then be able to continue to get work and money on top of that. So no, the employers shouldn't be getting away with that. That's not the point of this. And so what they're trying to do is turn the universal basic income as a supplement for businesses instead of for people. And that's really what that's about in this regard. And so we're all just trying to maneuver and shift these ideas in ways that don't actually address the issue that people don't really need to work as much as they're claiming that they have to. And that's what really is driving a lot of this. There's a desire to make sure that people think that they have to work the same amount of hours because it's a control factor. And what I believe here is truly happening is that in these 4 day work week article or anti 4 day work week propaganda articles, that it's being sold as the 4 day work week being anti-worker when it's truly in the best interest of every single person who works. It's mistaken to believe that workers will lack the imagination to see anything outside the current status quo, and that bosses can somehow use these arguments and these manipulative tools to try to rally workers against each other in order to secure the system at large, rather than seeing workers rally together and to come to each other's aid and to seize power and control and make arguments in favor of the 32-hour or less work week. Me, again, I want 4 days a week, 4-hour days. I still think that's quite feasible. I think that's quite realistic. Having a 16 to 20-hour work week is something that can happen and should happen. That's what is considered part-time now. Why not make it full-time? If people were able to do 40 hours on a single salary, why can't they do 20 hours on 2 salaries? And this is what, 80 years later, when we have increased automation and mechanization, there's no reason that couldn't possibly happen. The fear, of course, is that capitalist class won't make as much money and won't be able to rip people off as much. And if we don't want to do that, then we should definitely look in the direction of having worker co-ops take over so that the workers are completely in charge of their companies. That would be even better than all of this. The thing is, the ideas presented in these pieces are false and really do misrepresent the truth of the matter, and are calling out the flaws of capitalism and blaming workers for them in order to make us content with a 40-hour work week. We should fight against these understandings and seek to fight for the benefit of as many people as possible. That said, we should also celebrate when other workers make these gains and fight for them in our own areas of employment and work together to change the status quo to benefit more people's lives, not just our own. We're better when we work together. We are better when we have unions. We are better when we are in charge of our own companies. And we are better when we are not the ones being subject to the whims of bosses and the capitalist class who want to mandate and keep us under their thumbs and under control. So with that said, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. You can follow me on Twitter and check out my Discord in the description down below. My name is Anarchist Tara, and I thank you for watching.